Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
And you may want to sit down. I have some breaking news for you. Seriously, stop all the clocks. It is being reported that Prince Charles will walk his future daughter-in-law Meghan Markle down the aisle when she gets married to Prince Harry yesterday. We're now going to take 2 hours of trumpet music to mark this magnificent moment in the history of the British national pageant. Axel, have you got the trumpets ready? 5 minutes after 10 is the time. We will return to the question of, well, I think we will. I really like Prince Harry from what I can tell of him, and Meghan Markle seems to be a very refreshing change to the royal family, not least because she's made a successful career independently before joining the firm. But oddly, and I've spoken to quite a few foreign journalists about this, the wedding is not, however much we may pretend the contrary by dedicating 14 pages of our newspaper to it, it's not actually getting people very excited. I saw the motorcade yesterday. I think it was a motorcade. Couple of Range Rovers, couple of limos, outriders on the bikes blowing their whistles. And that was sort of... I actually got a bit cross, to be honest with you, because the traffic was shocking, and they were going through it like a hot knife through butter. I thought, why? And what possible urgency can there be to their wedding rehearsal that's more important than that mum over there doing the school run? I digress slightly. The challenge I have today is this. 5 minutes after 10 is the time. Very good morning to you. I have never managed to conduct a... I don't know if I should say this to you at the top of the show the day before a royal wedding. I don't think I've ever managed to conduct a radio phone-in about royalty that has been interesting. You would have thought back in the day it would be the easiest thing in the world. There used to be the sort of hardy perennials of the Sixth Form Debating Society that translated almost without noticing into radio debates. So you'd be looking at abortion, fox hunting, and then the abolition of the monarchy or the royal family. It was, I'm a little bit older perhaps than some of the people listening, but I'm considerably younger than some of them as well. And these were the timeless nuggets of our time. And yet, oddly, in the course of the decade and a bit that I've been doing this, the royal family has ceased to be an issue of controversy. It's very, very strange. I presume people have Republican tendencies, but when Princess Diana got married, there were Labour MPs who deliberately went on some ferry, a booze cruise type event. Mandelson was one of them, and I think the late Tessa Jowell did as well. Or certainly Harriet Harman did. And that was sort of a political statement. We're not going to mark this wedding because politics. That just doesn't seem to exist anymore. So what I'm building up towards later in the programme is the possibility of asking you to tell me why you're not interested in something, which is... I've almost gone a bit sort of come out in a rash. That is the exact opposite of... my own rule. I could not be breaking my own golden rule more violently than I am poised to break it today. So unless you can come up with a better way into this issue, because look, I think we should talk about it for an hour. There's nothing else in the news. I think we should talk about it for an hour, but I'm not quite sure what we should say about it. So over to you, all right? You can tweet me at Mr. James OB or text 84850. I think I'm going to ask why people aren't very interested in this wedding. But I reserve the right to change my mind. 8 minutes after 10 is the time. Now, speaking of people that have been kind enough to listen to this programme for a long time, do you remember my sort of little moment of clarity with regard to fire engines and Boris Johnson's policy as mayor? It's really remarkable listening to Nick talk to Cressida Dick today about the... almost sounded like a little poem. The ludicrous water cannons that Boris Johnson bought and which have become an albatross around the neck of the current mayor. Utterly unlicensed, complete grandstanding. And you sit there listening to a man describe... I beg your pardon, you sit there listening to the most senior police officer in the country describe an absurd and pointless purchase to the tune of several £100,000 of the old proverbial taxpayers' money. And a little bit of you sits there and goes, crikey, I bet his career went down the toilet shortly after he did that. And you remember he's Foreign Secretary. So I bet his career went down the toilet shortly after he actually endangered and imperiled further a British citizen currently held unfairly in a hostile state, namely Iran, I bet his career went down the toilet. Oh, no, he's still Foreign Secretary. All the lies he told about Brexit, still Foreign Secretary. Water cannon purchase, still Foreign Secretary. Posh people don't get punished for their mistakes in conservative Britain, do they? They just get paused for a while and then put straight back where they were before their mistakes. It's quite bizarre, because the thing I'm referring to, the issue that I remember really, really clearly was when he was shutting fire stations and getting rid of fire engines and denying it until he could deny it no longer. I had his the head of the emergency committee in the studio once, and I don't do this job like other people do. When the microphones go off, I don't start backslapping people and going out for slap-up feeds with all the trimmings and trebles all round. Microphones go off, my ears prick up. So this guy thought that when the microphones went off, he could somehow start telling me the truth. So he'd sat there denying till he was blue in the face that Boris Johnson was deliberately embarked upon a campaign to close fire stations and get rid of fire engines. And then when the microphones went off, it was a really remarkable moment. And he went, do you really think that Boris Johnson doesn't know exactly what's going on? So the microphones are off. And he starts telling me the polar opposite of what he'd said to me in the studio. Do you really think that Boris Johnson doesn't know exactly what's going on? So you remember what I did, don't you? I caught the eye of Jones, the engineer, who was the studio producer at the time, and said, "Can we play this out after the news break?" I've genuinely never seen a human being turn white before. I thought it was a proverb, you know. I thought it was like a cliche that wasn't true. He's sitting just opposite from where I am now, and he went white, and he marched into the production studio and started trying to order the producer not to do it and all of this. We didn't have a tape. We don't record the stuff that's that happens when we're not on air. There's no mechanism in place to do it, but he didn't know that. I thought I'd have a little bit of fun at his expense. And that was a really fascinating political moment for me. I think you can still find some reference to it on the old internet. The Evening Standard wrote it up. It was when Boris Johnson was ordered never to come on this programme again because of the possibility of being asked questions he wouldn't be able to answer. So I remember that because I just remember sitting here thinking, how can he be doing something that would endanger his own children? So I always look at emergency services issues. I tend to look at public sector issues from the perspective of being part of the protected. I'm feeling increasingly paternalistic as I get older about my country, about Britain. I think we should do more to look after people that need looking after. But we all need looking after when it comes to the emergency services. You could probably add the army to this list as well. But most obviously, the NHS, the police and the fire service, these are the people that protect us. They're also our insurance policy, because most days we don't need protecting, but most days our taxes are going to paying for that service of protection. So I always come at these stories from the perspective of being one of the protected. And I couldn't understand how a politician could take a decision that rendered himself and his family less protected. And I still don't. So a few of you explained to me in the context of fire that if you live in a wealthy part of town, you are demonstrably less likely to suffer from fire fatalities or fires in general. They are, as Grenfell Tower so tragically proved, often associated with older appliances or poorer standards of refurbishment and fitting, poorer health and safety. Sprinklers are more likely to be on the stairwells of blocks of flats inhabited by millionaires than they are on blocks of flats inhabited by shift workers. So I kind of understand that. It's a level of cynicism that I can't quite credit, I must be honest with you. I can't quite consciously imagine politicians like Boris Johnson sitting there going, yeah, well, look, poor people might burn to death more, but we'll be okay because we live in Islington. But that was the logic that you shared with me. That was the suggestion that you made to me. I move from that to police today because I look at a very similar state of affairs. I look at Sir Bernard Hogan-Howe, a former Met commissioner, and I remember his warning, the symbolism of the 30,000 figure. We haven't had fewer than 30,000 Metropolitan Police officers available for duty since 2003. We are currently below that figure, and it is a direct result of so-called austerity, huge cuts to the police budgets inflicted upon local authorities and cities by central government, and we see increases in crime and reductions in crime convictions. I mean, this is basic arithmetic. You've got crime increasing. I appreciate in London, if you're not familiar, then there's quite a noisome, quite a vocal racist minority who are trying to sort of use the fact that Sadiq Khan is a Muslim to somehow explain why crime is rising in London. It's rising because there's fewer officers and less money to spend. There's no mystery here, unless you're a massive racist and pretend that you can't understand this. The funniest thing I've seen, I actually put it to the Mayor last time he was in the studio, a suggestion that he's deliberately allowing crime rates to soar in order to bring in Sharia law to London at some unspecified future. You're laughing, I know, but these people are real and they breathe and their vote is worth the same as yours. So we, I think, have to increasingly acknowledge their existence, however absurd they may be. But you come to this simple arithmetic, right? Crime going up, convictions going down, number of officers on the beat plummeting. And you ask yourself, actually, how do politicians get away with this? 0345 6060973. And I'd love to hear your theory, rather than necessarily your sort of your personal experience. Coppers to the front of the queue, as is often the case on this programme. But how do they get away with it? You know, I get a little bit het up sometimes about the ease with which decent people are persuaded to punch themselves in the face by newspapers and politicians and demagogues and hate preachers. But on this one, you just sort of would think, wouldn't you? A rising... Is it because we don't see the crime ourselves? It's confined to relatively small corners of the country? So we see the number going up and we get exercised about the story, but then tomorrow we'll see a story about how much money we're spending on foreign aid and we'll be comfortable with cuts to the police budget. I genuinely don't know. Let's get the phone lines open on this. What's the question? The question very simply is, if crime is going up and convictions are going down, while the number of police officers available for duty has dipped below the threshold that the last Metropolitan Police Commissioner warned was the minimum for the Met to function well, who's responsible?
It's emerged that the number of criminal charges being brought in England and Wales has been falling. That's despite a significant rise in crime. Analysis by the BBC has found that 65,000 fewer people were charged last year. More police forces are now setting up special telephone units with the aim of closing investigations without a police officer having to attend at all. Our special correspondent Lucy Manning reports.
Beaten up, then let down. Richard Bolland was attacked by a masked man in Wyke on the outskirts of Bradford.
Felt an arm go around my neck. I realised that I was blacking out.
The names of suspects were passed to West Yorkshire Police, but 18 months on, no one's been charged. Not enough evidence, say police.
Nothing new would come to light. If I could come up with something, then I should let them know. But other than that, it was on the shelf. And it took a couple of days, really, for it to sink in and think, hang on a minute, I'm the victim, not the detective.
Well, since 2010, here in West Yorkshire Police, we've had a 35% real term cut. And what that has meant in terms of officers and staff numbers is I have 1,400 less people to be able to respond to the demands.
I have recorded as a crime, right, but we will not pursue it.
This in West Yorkshire, filmed by BBC's Panorama, is one of the first force crime management units. Here they aim to close cases without further police involvement.
It sounds like this crime is going to get filed.
They deal on the phone with nearly 900 crimes a day, using a checklist to decide if a case should be closed because it's not worth pursuing or too difficult to solve.
At the moment, it's around the 50% mark at the moment in the crimes that have been filed after that primary investigation. I think the maximum we could get to is 56%, so we're there or thereabouts.
But for victims of crime, the lack of charges hurts. Rebecca's purse was stolen. This, the police response.
But we'll close the crime down as undetected at this stage, pending results of any CCTV inquiries.
You're always told from being quite young, you know, the police force are there for you, they're here to listen to you. And then when actually something happens and it gets reported, if nothing's done about it, you feel a bit crestfallen afterwards. I know that I did personally.
There is a national crisis in the shortage of detectives in England and Wales. We simply have not got enough properly trained staff to be able to deal with complex crimes.
Over the last 3 years, overall crime has risen by 21%, but charges have dropped by 11%. Violent crime is up 50%, but there's been a fall in charges of 5%. Public order offences have soared by 78%, but charges are down by 10%. And domestic burglary is up 5%, but there's been a 25% drop in charges.
We're conscious that when a victim comes to the police, of course, he or she must have faith that the investigation will be conducted properly and to the rightful conclusion. And so we're looking at this to see whether there is more that chiefs and police and crime commissioners should be doing, but also if there's anything on a national level that should be done.
But with the police having more and often increasingly complex crimes to investigate, but with fewer officers, it seems victims are now less likely to get justice. Lucy Manning, BBC News.
0345 6060 973. Because you've got a new Home Secretary in place after the last one resigned for the sins of the one before that. The one before that is currently Prime Minister, and the current Home Secretary, well, I don't know. How do we let them get away with it? So if you're a police officer, please have a crack immediately at my analysis of your situation and tell me why I've got absolutely everything absolutely wrong. You could, of course, also cautiously agree. 0345 6060 973. But just step back from politics and policing if, like me, you're a civilian, a member of the protected. And just tell me why you think we can be sitting here as a relatively well-educated population and talking about falling numbers in the police service, rising crime, falling detection rates, and wondering why there's any mystery at all. I mean, what are we here for? You've reduced the number of police officers and more crimes are being committed and fewer crimes are being solved. There's no mystery here. It's so bleeding obvious that this is a direct result of government policy that I want you today to tell me why we're not all singing from the same hymn sheet and not all describing exactly the same scenario and not all absolutely furious with the woman who was Home Secretary when these cuts were introduced, despite myriad warnings made to her that they would lead to increases in crime. What's going on, guys? Thank you for holding my hand and bearing with me. I'm kind of just muddling along a bit this morning, remembering how confused I was when Boris Johnson reduced the number of fire engines and fire stations in my home city, despite the fact that he lived here, so he'd be making his children less safe, as well as other people's children. And today I'm wondering how we've arrived as a place, as a population, where we can see central government introduce swinging cuts to the police budget, which has led to a dipping below the number of officers that Sir Bernard Hogan-Howe said was the minimum needed by the Met to function well. And people like me wring our hands and sit here in front of a microphone wondering why crime is going up and detection is coming down. It's blimmin' obvious. So I suppose in a way I'm asking you to explain British society to me in words of 2 syllables or fewer, and in 3 sentences. Over to you, Chris in Hackney. Fill your boots.
Hi, James. Nobody's got the complete answer to the question you posed, obviously, but I would suggest that one really important reason that why politicians are allowed to get away with this is because far too many journalists, and you are an honourable exception to this.
No.
No, I'm serious. But far too many journalists who interview those senior politicians don't do their homework properly, so that politicians are allowed to say the most outrageous things. I mean, you quite rightly said this morning that crime is going up and police numbers are going down, but I've heard everybody from the Prime Minister downwards at PMQs saying exactly the opposite, boasting how police numbers have gone down, and look, crime has gone down as well.
So, and the people that believe them, the people who believe them, do so out of tribalism then?
Yes, and as I say, because, obviously in Parliament it requires the opposition to have done the homework so that they can challenge it.
Yes.
But when it's an interview on television or radio, it requires a journalist to say, well, that's certain types of crime, isn't it, Home Secretary?
Yes.
And there are certain other types of crime that have been dramatically on the increase while you've been, reducing police numbers.
And I mean, a reduction in conviction rates is actually very bad news, because if it goes alongside an increase in reported crime, it means that the shortage of officers is compromising their ability to detect, their ability to actually solve crimes.
Yes, and you remember that police officer you had on a few weeks back who was explaining that, when you close police stations, which sounds, like a really good idea because it saves money to the officers on the beat, it means that when he or she makes an arrest, they've got miles to travel and a queue to join, to actually put people in. And
absolutely. No, I do remember that, and it was an education, wasn't it? Because, I mean, the logic of Sadiq Khan's answer to my question when he was here was quite strong. He said, I've got a choice between, losing 3 bodies or keeping that desk open, you see. And I thought, well, yeah, you want bodies, don't you, not desks? But actually, it's not binary like everything else in life. It's more complicated than a simple, do you want sugar in your tea question, isn't it? What are you ex-police, Chris?
No, I'm not. I'm ex-education.
Oh, fair enough.
But exactly the same thing, applies there. I nearly throw things at the radio every time I hear someone, from government saying, but we're putting more money into schools than ever before. But yes, but if the costs of employing staff have gone up even more dramatically than the money you're putting in,
it's a meaningless platitude. It's a meaning. Yeah. So then I'd ask you what your explanation is for the self-interest argument, because all politicians are citizens. All politicians live in areas that are policed. All politicians will at some point have children in their lives, whether their own children or not, who need educating. So you see where I'm going?
And the vast majority of a certain type of politician, have their children educated privately, so it doesn't bother them if...
I don't like that argument, the idea that they'll just sort of... Because even under Labour governments, they'd be announcing all the time that there was more money going in. But focus on the police. If you live in the country and you are one of the protected, how can you comfortably bring in more cuts to the protection than you need to?
But on the day-to-day issues of, that involve the police and the community, people with money are infinite, including me, I have to say, are infinitely better insulated,
Is it that simple? So then you could be, whether you're left or right, you don't recognise the reality of policing. So when they announce a cut, you don't think it's going to cut you. You're not going to bleed. Cut away.
I think it does affect you, but it just affects you less because you will have other resources that you can draw on if the police are not able to.
I wonder if there's an academic theory in here somewhere that you should be aware of as a former educator. So the idea is that any public sector cuts will impact hardest those who already have the least.
Yeah, I mean, when I spoke to you before, a couple of weeks ago about the education thing, I was talking about Finland, and that's...
Oh yes, I remember. Yes.
If you ensure that everybody from the Prime Minister downwards has to send their children to state schools, everybody has got a vested interest in making sure state schools are really good and well resourced.
But you have to have it absolutely equal and equalised from the beginning. Otherwise, you're sort of relying on people to sacrifice their children's education on the altar of a political principle. If there is no choice, if there is no alternative, then it is doable. But yeah, as we said at the time, I think, Chris, that's some oil tanker that you'd have to turn around. So thank you, mate. That's a perfect start, because it focuses my mind in on this question of, if you're one of the protected, i.e. a normal citizen, a normal civilian, and you're also a politician, i.e. not really normal at all, how can you do that? I mean, how could Theresa May as Home Secretary... Oh, crikey, I nearly turned into Andrea Leadsom then and said, I wonder if it's because she hasn't got any children. That's terrible, isn't it? I do apologise. I'm so glad I didn't say that out loud. But when I'm thinking of these issues, I'm often thinking of my children. And I'm thinking, why would I want to make the society in which they live less safe? I'm not really thinking about myself. I'm thinking about my kids, because that's what happens when you become a parent. Why would you want to make your society less safe? So when she stood in front of the police Federation in Manchester a few years ago and was told in no uncertain terms what these cuts would do to the service, is it political blinkered? They say, oh, well, police are always complaining, the army always wants more, firefighters are always on strike. Is it just really lazy Daily Mail style ideology that Theresa May signed up to? Or is there something subtler going on? I am a citizen, but as a politician, I'm going to make the country less safe. I'm going to cut protection. Who needs the protection most? Poor people. Who's least likely to vote Conservative? Poor people. Who's least likely to vote at all? Statistically, poor people who are young. Who's most likely to be affected by police cuts? poor people who are young. There we go, we've solved it. We can all go home. Festus, what a magnificent name, is in New Cross. Festus, what would you like to say?
How you doing, James?
All good. What's on your mind?
I'm just wondering whether we're kind of being buttered up in the long term. So you keep stripping, you keep slashing at the service. Eventually, just like we've seen with the education system, just like we've seen with the NHS, they then turn around and say, well, we need a new solution. And I'm wondering whether it's an attempt to kind of arm police forces.
But why would they even want to do... I'm going to go all Socratic on you now. I'm going to keep asking questions until we get to brass tacks. Actually, I'm not looking at the clock. I've only got 40 seconds. Oh, well, so much for Socrates. Why would they want to do that, though?
Well, you're opening yourself up to a new market. And who's going to be making the gains from that? It will be the police.
What market? The gun market?
Yes.
Nah, look, I will sign up to an awful lot of accusations of the current government that smack of cronyism and borderline corruption, certainly racism in the context of Windrush. I think that's becoming impossible to argue against. But the idea that there are some puppet masters, some secretive puppet masters, deliberately denuding the police force in order to make a fortune out of selling guns at some unspecified point in the future, is that a bridge you're going to fight on?
James, we said exactly the same thing for the NHS 20 years ago, and look at where we are now.
I'm very glad the news has come to my rescue. It's 12:30. And would you like, that scene in The Wizard of Oz where Toto pulls back the curtain and the wizard is furiously pulling levers and pressing buttons. Ignore the old man behind it. Would you like to have a little look behind the curtain? Just been talking to the producer about our correspondent Rachel Venables, who is currently in Windsor covering the royal nuptials. And I think for the first time in our working relationship together, I just said to us, let her do whatever she wants, I don't care. So we'll find out shortly after 11:15 whether or not Rachel has decided to conduct Vox Pops, which involves recording comments, or whether, as I have encouraged her to do, whether or not she goes in live, does live interviews with people who've turned up at Windsor the day before a wedding of two people they've never met. I'm still struggling, aren't I? How are we going to talk about this at 12 o'clock in a way that makes something fundamentally uninteresting interesting? Sheila Fogarty's not very pleased with me. She's already tweeted a corrective. Make me excited. There you go. That's your challenge. That's your starter for 10 at 12. About the royal wedding, don't send me inappropriate photographs or anything like that. Pictures of sandwiches. Peter is in Thirst to steer us back to the question of policing. If you're just joining us, actually, just hold your fire, Peter, if you would. I've worked something out during the break. I sometimes come on air convinced that the story we're discussing is more complicated than the tabloid treatment that you might find elsewhere allows, and it almost always is. You know, you say, no, but actually if you dig into the figures, or if you look at what the Bank of England has done, or if you actually listen to experts, you'll realise that this isn't... For example, with rap music and drill music, there is absolutely no evidence anywhere published in a sort of peer-reviewed academic sense, whatever a High Court judge might say, or indeed a police officer, that a certain type of music will lead people to commit a certain type of crime. You know what I always say when culture is blamed for crime? I said, don't let these people near Shakespeare. If they get their hands on Titus Andronicus, they'll be burning the complete works in a massive, great big bonfire in the middle of Birmingham by tea time. So I often think things are more complicated than tabloid treatments allow. But sometimes when I look at a tabloid treatment I don't understand, and I can't work out which scapegoat it's designed to denigrate, I wonder whether things are actually simpler, and that what they've tried to do is distract the public and the population. Because if you cut police budgets violently, reduce the number of police officers severely, and then report an increase in certain types of crime and a decrease in conviction rates, i.e. detection rates, there's no complication there at all. It's absolutely bleeding obvious what's happened. But then you deploy the right-wing media to pretend that it's not obvious and that there are other answers and other explanations and other possibilities. That's where I am at the moment, and we'll find out where you are imminently. 10:37 is the time. Peter is in Thirsk. Peter, what would you like to say?
James, I agree with you that the amount of funding available for policing and other public services is being reduced to the point where the services are becoming weaker.
Yes.
I'm not sure I would
there's a big but coming
on changes in recorded crime, because there's a number of reasons behind that. One is, even the Office of National Statistics said that the police were under-recording crime in the early part of this decade and the late part of the last one. However, that proper recording will have led to some of the recorded increase. Nonetheless, in addition, there have been other things that have been added to the basket of goods in the crime records. So that adds up to the ballpark number. You should never look at the overall number. But where we're seeing weaknesses are the amount of hours that officers are having to work, the number of incidents that they're having to attend, the amount of paperwork, and every Home Secretary says, oh, I'm going to reduce bureaucracy in the police, and every Home Secretary adds to it. Yeah. The forms that they have to fill in, and the level of accuracy and detail that officers now have to put on those forms, which I didn't have to when I was serving, that all contributes to more and more pressure on these fine people who stand in harm's way on our behalf.
I think you're almost certainly
you
right.
talk about conviction rates.
Yes.
Okay. Look on... Yeah, you got me to read The Secret Barrister's book.
Oh, good.
Read that again.
Yes.
Yeah?
It's very good, isn't it?
The criminal justice system has been... It's mid-morning. I won't use the word I want, but it's not been helped by the amount of money taken out of it. We now have.
But this is the thing. This is politically. This is the thing. There's a quick clarification that the book by the Secret Barrister is an astonishing account of the crippling, I think we can politely describe, of the criminal justice system undertaken quite cynically and deliberately as a result of austerity policies. But you lead me back to the political question. I'm not going to dispute your analysis of policing because your decades on the force obviously put you head and shoulders above me. How can... This is what I don't get, and I've got a horrible feeling I sound really naive for a 46-year-old who's been around the block a couple of times when I say this. How can politicians sit by while they're compromising the security of their own population, their own people, potentially their own family? That's the bit I don't get.
And that's the bit that I'm starting to find disappointing.
In me or in them?
Sorry?
In me or in them?
No. In the overall situation,
yes.
We have as a nation to decide what services do we want and how are we going to pay for them. Yeah, that's the job of politicians. And merely manipulating data and statistics and putting the right spin on it is a dreadful thing to do. Yeah, even here, I'm looking out at a sunny Sutton Bank today to make you jealous.
Lucky man.
Even here, we're starting to see activity from County Lines gangs. And at my own house, I've upped the security, which is, I've lived here over 20 years, and this is a very low crime area.
Thirsk is pretty much a pick for people not familiar with that corner of the country. It's a picture postcard market town, I think it could be fairly described. I mean, you know me, Peter, I prefer Helmsley, but Thirsk has its attractions.
But the point I am making is that we are seeing these people being faced with more and more pressure. But it's not just the police. It is cuts in the court service. It is cuts in the legal aid. It is cuts. And that isn't, if you like, we lay this at politicians of all parties' doors because if somebody goes to the electorate and says, we want you to pay more, social care this time last year was a very good example. We want you to pay more, the public will kick the politicians in the proverbial ghoulies.
Very nicely put. And thank you.
They thoroughly did. And I was out campaigning this time last year. The atmosphere changed as the manifesto was published.
It got abandoned before the actual election, didn't it? And yet the Conservatives still seek to accuse Jeremy Corbyn of having abandoned manifesto pledges, despite not having done so before the election and not having won the election. But we digress slightly.
I'm not sure a party political point helps in this.
No, I think you're right.
I think and say, we'll do this for nothing.
I agree with you on that. Actually, I retract. Hang on. I retract the party political point. I just want to clarify something else with you before we hit the break. It's because the care homes thing is a brilliant example. The thing you can never sell is the idea that some people need to bear more of a burden than others. But I don't know actually that even if you sought to spread that burden equally, you'd have been... Because the idea that people need to pay more. Why can't they compute that if they're voting for a party that's selling them tax cuts, they're voting for a party that's selling them police cuts? I should write posters. Why can't they? Why can't people see that clearly?
Those dots.
Well, how can you not join? It's so obvious. Oh, no, it isn't, because they think their taxes are going on Brussels and foreign aid and unemployed people and single mothers. They don't realise that when they vote for the party selling them tax cuts. They're voting to cut police officers. They think they're voting to stop giving contraception to children in Malawi. Is that still a rhetorical flourish?
I think you are right in terms of the way in which some newspapers present these facts. For example, whenever the crime data is coming out, you'll see a picture of a couple of fat policemen. It's the same picture on the Daily Mail.
Or the picture of Ian Wright having been photographed with a bunch of police officers, which if you're a sort of lazy right-winger who enjoys insulting readers, you'll print that every day and pretend that that's proof that the problems in crime figures are caused by police posing for selfies with Ian Wright.
There is a wider thing as well, which is sometimes cops don't help themselves with that type of activity.
It's any other profession as well. You take a photograph of a panda car parked up outside a chip shop, which again, actually, Thirsk is very well served by fish and chip shops. Then it's not representative, but it is somehow infuriating. Peter, I do enjoy. I should say, I do. You occasionally in the morning send me a photograph of the views from your North Yorkshire idyll. I do appreciate it enormously.
It's because my house is on the market, sir.
Oh, is it? Oh, well, I'll start retweeting them instead of just favouriting. Put on a link. I want 1.5%. 10:44 is the time. Steve is in Reigate. Steve, what's going on?
Well, good to speak to you, James.
Likewise.
You've been listening to you for years.
Good man.
I think it was in relation to the caller you had just before the break.
Yes.
And the area that I live in, we rarely see a policeman or a policewoman. I mean, it's just, and over the last sort of year to 2 years, crime has increased. Like people selling drugs locally and break-ins and robberies, etc., etc.
Yes.
We can't get the support, so we've actually gone down the road. The residents have gone down the road, well, they're 3/4 of the way there, of getting in sort of number plate registration recognition cameras and employing our own security service.
Oh Lord! So I mean, this is.
And the point.
Go on.
And the point that your chap made was perfect. Because he's right. It's because we can afford to do it. We can. And my gut rented, because I know that those that can't just have to put up with services as they are. And it's just not fair.
And this is, I mean, quite depressing, really, that so many of the conversations we have end up leading to a very similar conclusion. So under this government, at this time in British history, with Brexit likely to economically damage everybody unnecessarily, there is an appetite in power, in the corridors of power, to stop spending money on people who need it most, and the holes in the lives of people like you and I must say me can be plugged by private expenditure. We can pay for our own security. We can pay for our own cameras.
That's it. And it's just not right. It's just not fair in any way, shape, or form. And I have a history of sort of understanding how lack of sort of resources can impact, particularly things like burglaries and so forth in a specific area. Because I did a stint for Crime Stoppers.
Oh, did you?
For a while, I worked for them for a while. I was responsible for the Most Wanted putting the Most Wanted website out there.
Oh gosh!
I remember doing a whole day of interviews, sitting in a booth, doing a whole day of interviews, talking about sort of like, home security.
Yes.
And it was shocking the amount of responses, or other calls that I had come in, and sort of discussions around the lack of resources even then, and that was over a decade ago.
Yes.
And things have just gotten worse and worse and worse.
And it's simplistic, and I'm patting myself on the back for complicating the issue earlier, but it must be linked to the rhetoric of public expenditure being misdirected. So if you're consuming an almost unleavened diet of foreign aid criticism, about 0.7% of the budget. Brussels, about 1.2% of expenditure, which we make back many times over. Welfare, single mothers living in massive houses, foreigners getting given Rolls Royces. If you're consuming that diet daily, that's how you get persuaded to vote to cut your own security and safety and health, isn't it? That's how you do it. You don't think, oh, I'm voting to cut old age pensions, I think, are by far the biggest drain on the public purse. How do you persuade someone to vote to be less safe and less secure? Answer, show them a picture of a Malawian contraception clinic and tell them a nonsensical story about bananas. Steve, thank you. Back to police cuts. Stephen's in Peterborough. Stephen, what would you like to say?
So I do work quite closely with the police on certain business that I do. I run my own company.
Are you a massive criminal?
No,
I'd love that. I'd love it if you'd rang in and said, I do work quite closely with the police by dint of being a massive criminal, so I have some very interesting insights into this relationship.
Yeah.
Go on, then.
No. And the one thing that is blatantly obvious is that they've got rid of virtually everybody over the age of 50. They've given them enhanced pensions, they've paid them off. So the knowledge base from the older guys has gone.
Same in the prison service, because if you've got to make cuts, then cutting someone who's paid a lot of money, or not a lot, but relatively speaking, they're on a high wage because they've been there a long time and they've, earned it. Get rid of them because you'll make more bang for your buck, but of course you completely ignore the state of the service that you're going to be left with.
And you've lost that knowledge source.
Yes.
So the younger guys are not then mentored in the same way. You can then turn around and start making the same errors about every 18 months, 2 years, because you're promoting people into positions where they quite haven't got the right experience and knowledge. And then you can turn around and start, which is one of the stats that you came out with, is that you've got more issues with crime and less convictions. So again, that knowledge source has gone.
The only words you haven't said, I think, just to go for a full house, would be local intelligence, because that's tied to that as well, isn't it? Officers who've got years on the clock in a certain postcode.
Well, local intelligence, so the police community support officers.
Exactly.
Were put in place to try and do that, and now they've got rid of them.
Well, and community police officers who weren't PCSOs, they were proper police, forgive me for saying proper, and they've been cut as well. It was almost word for word what Theresa May was warned about in, I think, 2011 or thereabouts at the Police Federation conference.
And I think the one thing, because we do risk management quite a lot.
Oh yeah.
And the one thing that people don't understand is that if you've got a really good organisation that's been skilled up properly, there is a time bounce before it starts to make the same errors time and time again. And that's wholly because you haven't got the right people in the right place to say, hold on a minute, take your time, this is what happened years ago, we need to learn from that so we don't make the same mistake today.
Yes, I hear you. Just can I ask you a cheeky question?
Yeah.
What are your politics?
My politics, well, I voted for Tony Blair. I couldn't vote for Gordon Brown. I couldn't vote for David Cameron. I had to vote Liberal because that was the only one. The last local elections, I couldn't vote for Labour or Conservatives because I don't believe them. So I had to vote with the only one in my constituency that looked valid, and that was a Green.
Crikey, I wasn't expecting chapter and verse quite like that. So what an honest man you are. Yeah. And also, I would argue, like me, feeling a little bit politically homeless at the moment. I very unfairly was hoping that you were going to say you were very, very right-wing, you were a big conservative, because the people I need to try and get... What I don't understand is how people cannot... I tell you what, if this sounds patronising, sue me. How can people fall for this rubbish? How can they think that when they vote for tax cuts, they're voting to stop contraceptive clinics and single mothers getting council flats, instead of realising that what they're actually voting for with austerity is cuts to their own police service, their own health service, their own education service, their children's schools? That seems to me to be the great triumph, rhetorically speaking, of the last 20 years in this country. Or let's go back a little less far, back even to 2010. How can you persuade people to vote against their own interests in this way? Answer, as Donald Trump understands better than anybody, persuade them that they're really going to hurt someone else, and they won't notice that they're voting to hurt themselves. Just build the wall.